All right, guys, so this week's musical project is we are going to be building pitched instruments. So instruments that can play more than two sounds, a high sound and a low sound at least. Your goal is to have as many sounds as you think you can create in that time. So I'm going to show you a couple of versions of this. You should have seen some of those in the different stomp videos that I had posted up. So you can get some ideas, but we're going to look at multiple different possibilities for this. And we're going to start with something called a lamellophone. Now, a lamellophone is an instrument that uses tines to create their sounds. So for instance, Untitled Chapter. Now, you guys who have had me in class, you've seen this before. Those tines right there are made by pounding out metal on an anvil. And I can play them by plucking them with my fingers to create sounds. Like this. This happens to come from Zimbabwe. This type of lamellophone is very popular in Africa, particularly in what are called the Bantu people, which are a tribal people in kind of southeastern Africa. But the kalimba and other forms of this are found not only all around Africa, but also all around the world. They're made of lots of different materials. This one happens to be made of metal, but they can be made in lots of different ways. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to build a lamellophone. Now, lamellophones are made of two parts at least. One part is a sounding board of some kind. This happens to be my table, which I'm going to use as a sounding board first, and then some kind of tines. Tines can be made out of wood, tines can be made out of metal, tines can be made out of plastic, tines can be made out of bobby pins. The only rule about them is that they have some kind of springiness to them. So for instance, this is a metal skewer and I can bend it back and forth, and as I bend it, it has some spring and it will actually move itself back. You can see that there. This is a wooden chopstick. I could do the same thing with a wooden chopstick. It's a little stiffer, but it has that same kind of bendy and springiness to it. You could use metal skewers. As I said, you could use bobby pins. The next thing you need is some way of keeping those stiff and tight to your process. So this, for instance, is an actual nyunga that I am building. You can see that I have a large metal piece in the middle here that is a bridge that gives an angle to them. You can see that my my metal tines point upward. There's a secondary bridge back here. This actually pulls down on the strings or on the tines, and in this case I'm using bolts and wing nuts. So I tighten my wing nuts, which tightens down the bar here, pulling down on these to keep them pressure. That makes this a very specific distance and very specific tightness. So when I pluck my tines, you can hear I get my pitch. Now, if I was to make my tines longer, or I was to make them shorter, or if I was to loosen this up, I would get different sounds. So let's look at how we can do this with just a table. Now, with just a table and our hand, we can build an effective lamellophone. So for instance, I'm going to scoot my thing back so you can see a little bit better. I'm just going to hang my wooden chopstick over the edge. I'm going to push my hand down on it and listen. Now watch what happens. I'm just going to roll my hand back so my thumb comes up. And you can hear that it's already becoming different pitches because as I move back, I'm changing the length of my tine. I can move it out further, which starts me at a lower pitch. I can move it in closer, which starts me at a higher pitch. Same thing with the metal one. I hold it back here, I push it down against it. It's very low because it's longer. Now, you should have noticed that my metal one was already lower pitched than my wood one, and that's because my wood one is much stiffer. This has a lot more room to vibrate. The more it vibrates, the lower of a sound it creates. The faster and shorter the vibrations are, the higher the sound it creates. That's why a shorter tine makes a higher sound than a longer tine. There's more room to vibrate. So, if you want to build a lamellophone, an mbira or a kalimba or anything like that, you can build them just the way I showed you. You could build them to be plucked, you could build them to be hit. Hitting depends on how well your thing was designed. But you need to create at least two tines to create at least two pitches consistently, a high and a low. So two of those at least, something to put them against. Probably not your hand,
Bolts are a way of doing it like we saw with the other one I did. You could tie them down. You could get a piece of wood and ratchet them down with something. You could bind them. Just find some way to keep them down and tight.
All right, the next type of instrument that we're going to talk about is, of course, the stringed instrument. Now, stringed instruments are all made in effectively the same way. They use strings. Now, each string is of a different thickness or a different length. Now, this one happens to be a fairly thick string, as you can see. I can use anything from thread all the way up to rope to do this. The thicker the string, the lower the sound, because the slower that string is going to vibrate when it's plucked or when it's bowed. There is an old way of doing this, though, that was discovered back in ancient Greece. And that's the idea that if you take a single string of whatever length, and then you were to cut that string in half. So I'm going to take this string, cut it in half. You raise the pitch of that string significantly, and it's always by the same amount. So if I cut the string in half again, I would raise it by that same amount over again. The first stringed instruments were called lyres, and they were basically just a curved piece of wood or metal with strings of different lengths, made different length by the length of the wood on the curved part. And they would play effectively 5 total notes in a pentatonic scale. So we're going to look at how to build a stringed instrument in this next one. They're not that complicated. There is a lot you can do to make them work in different ways, but we're going to look at a pretty simple way of building a stringed instrument.
For making a stringed instrument, you of course need a piece of string. The longer the string is, the lower your tone. The thicker your string is, as I said earlier, this is a very thick string, the lower your tone is going to be. And the next thing you just need is tension. So you can create the tension by wrapping it around both your hands and pulling really tight. Problem is, now you can't play it very easily. The easiest way to do this is to tie it to something. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tie it down to the leg here of my table. Now that I've got it tied down, I can stretch my string across and I can provide tension. The higher my tension is, the better this will work. So I'm going to brace the table with my leg to make sure it doesn't move. I'm going to pull it as tight as I can. I'm going to pluck it. Now I'm going to actually make my string longer. So I'm going to move my arm that's holding my string out further, still provide as much tension as I can. And you can hear that. I can half my string length. Pull it in even closer. I can also pull really tight and just loosen my grip. And as I tighten or loosen my grip, I create different pitches. So that is the easiest way to make one of these. Now, if you want to make a stringed instrument, you have to have some way for it to constantly work. So again, that brings us back to my lamellophone. These make excellent ways of creating tuning systems. So again, you set up here, you tie your string to your bolt here, which this is a eye bolt, and you twist your eye bolt. And as you do that, if you have it attached to something like, say, your table, as you twist your eye bolt, you're going to create tension. And it should not back off very easily, and that allows you to create a consistent tension. So if you had a long piece of wood, you could put a nail at one end of it, you could tie your string to that nail, you could put an eye bolt at the other end of it, and you could twist that eye bolt to create tension, and it would stay tense between the 2 points until the string started to loosen up, which happens. So that is how you make a simple stringed instrument.
All right, and last but not least, we have wind instruments. Now, wind instruments are created by blowing into the instrument itself. You blow into the instrument either transversely, which means you blow across the top of the instrument, or you blow into the instrument through some kind of mouthpiece. Now, we've talked about woodwind instruments, and that's specifically what we're going to talk about today. Woodwind instruments have an open mouthpiece typically, or they have a piece of wood that makes a reed. We're going to specifically look at the open mouthpiece or the transverse flute. Now you can make these in a lot of ways. The oldest ones were just various lengths of wooden piping that you would blow across to create different sounds. The shorter the pipe, the higher the pitch. We are going to be using a bottle to do this. Any kind of bottle works, and we're going to be filling it with something like water. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to build those.
Now for a simple wind instrument, as I said, you can use a bottle. The size and shape of your bottle does matter. The smaller your bottle is, the higher your initial pitch is going to be. The bigger your bottle is, the lower. The mouthpiece, the opening of the bottle itself actually matters. The smaller that hole is, the easier it is to use. Using a cup, for instance, is extremely difficult because it's very difficult to get the air to do what you want it to do, which is you want the air to go in bounce off whatever your surface is, and then come back out the top. So this, for instance, is a honey bottle from a kind of honey thing that I had in that I was given for a gift. You can see I put water in it. The water is almost all the way to the top. Now when I blow into the top of this, across the top of this actually, my air is going to enter in, it's going to hit that water, it's going to bounce out. So I'm going to go ahead and it's going to go off screen for you to be able to hear this. Listen. Now, it's pretty faint because this is a very small bottle, which means it's pretty high pitch. But if I just dump some of this water out, I'll get a lower pitch. So you can see I have a significant amount less water. I'm almost to the bottom. And now my air has more distance to go. So it'll come in the top and it'll travel all the way down to my water way down here. So listen to this. And there we go. In fact, if I emptied it all the way, I'd get an even lower pitch. Now, these create a very unique, specific kind of sound if I use water. I could use anything else I want in. This is an experiment, so you're going to have to try lots of different ideas.
All right, everybody. So those are the different possibilities. So there is a string option. There is a percussion option using a lamellophone. And there is a wind option. Now, those are just possibilities. You can have tons of fun with this. You can do this in all kinds of different ways. You can use different sized things and hit them like wood blocks. The smaller wood blocks make a higher sound, lower makes a lower sound. You could get really creative and you could attempt to build your own, say, xylophone. That's very tricky because you have to cut out the bottom of the wood or the metal or whatever you use for that. You would need a parent's help for that. In any of these cases, this is a great project to do with your parents if they're able to. If they can't, try it yourself. Build whatever you can. Whatever materials you just have lying around. I don't want you spending any money on this. Just find something lying around your house, see what you can make with that. Have fun, send me pictures of your cool instruments, send me audio or video of you playing your cool instruments. I'm just very curious to see. And have fun with this one this week as you practice these kind of principles of an instrument. Bye guys.